What if the word chosen, when applied to Scorpio, never meant what you always imagined? You've heard it 1,000 times, that Scorpio is intense, profound, the most mysterious of the zodiac. But no one ever told you exactly what they were chosen for. Chosen by whom? What if all this fame wasn't about any beautiful destiny, but about a much cruder, almost invisible mechanism that only appears after a person goes through certain cycles of destruction and reconstruction that repeat throughout their life? There's a specific scar that runs through almost every Scorpio, and it doesn't yet have a name for you, but it has a very clear function that most people have never truly stopped to observe. It's not about suffering more than other signs, as so many people repeat without ever explaining why. It's about something else, hidden right in the middle of it all. By the end of this video, something you felt for years, without being able to explain it, will finally make sense in a way it never has before, and maybe you'll discover that being chosen never had anything to do with luck. Think about a time when you had to keep immense pain to yourself without telling anyone because you felt that no one would truly understand. Think about how many times you noticed something wrong with a person long before any proof appeared. This has a name, this has a function, and the function isn't simply to suffer more than other signs, as so many people repeat without ever explaining why. The function is different. It acts as a kind of filter, an emotional filter that separates what is superficial from what is real. While other signs go through life on a more comfortable surface, Scorpio carries an internal radar that insists on pulling everything to the bottom. And that bothers people. It bothers others who feel they are being read inside. And it bothers the Scorpio themselves, who often just want to rest from that lucidity that never switches off. But here's the detail that almost no one notices. This weight that seems like a curse has another hidden face that only appears after certain cycles of destruction and reconstruction. And it's precisely at this point, right here, that the chosen word begins to make sense in a completely different way than you imagined until now. Because perhaps the right question has never been why Scorpio suffers so much, but rather what exactly this suffering is silently preparing inside while no one is paying attention. There's a huge difference between carrying meaningless pain and carrying pain that is gradually shaping something that doesn't yet have a name. And if you've ever felt that you needed to go through that specific thing, in that exact way, painful as it was, only to later understand why it happened that way, then perhaps you've already touched, without realizing it, on this other hidden face behind the chosen word. There's only one thing left to understand now, and this is the part that almost no one sees on their own, because it resides right in the middle of what it wasn't about how much he suffers, but rather what purpose in the end is served by everything he goes through in silence. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book. It's called The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose. And the first thing that caught my attention was that it doesn't treat Scorpio's patterns as a flaw to be corrected. It treats them as a rare ability, the capacity to go deep when everyone insists on staying on the surface. It's almost like scuba diving training for those who were born knowing how to hold their emotional breath, but without knowing exactly why. The material helps organize all that is normally loose inside you, transforming that old weight into a clearer direction to point. And you, who have come this far paying attention to this pattern for the first time in such a direct way, are probably still feeling this discomfort now, trying to fit it into your own story. This is exactly the moment when looking inward is most productive, before clarity once again turns into just another pain kept without a destination. The link is in the first pinned comment, but be aware this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. Leave a comment below. When was the last time you felt you needed to destroy something inside yourself before it destroyed you first? There's a detail that goes unnoticed in the lives of most Scorpios. This internal radar we were talking about doesn't switch on and off of its own. It works on its own all the time, picking up micro-expressions, strange silences, changes in tone of voice that anyone else would miss. And the most curious thing is that Scorpios almost never realize they're doing this. For them, it's just understanding the obvious. Only later, seeing someone's astonished reaction, do they understand that it wasn't so obvious to others. This mechanism has a simple origin to understand, even if no one has explained it this way before. At some point in life, probably very early on, Scorpio learned that trusting without checking under the rug was too costly, a disappointment that hurt too deeply, a betrayal that came without warning, and from then on, the internal system decided, without asking permission, that it would never again accept the surface version of anything. Every word would pass through a filter. Every gesture would be compared to what was said before. Every promise would be mentally filed, awaiting confirmation over time, as if each new relationship needed to prove, day after day, that it deserved to continue existing. This becomes, over time, a kind of permanent, tiring, but also extremely precise vigilance. And here lies the first unsettling contradiction. This vigilance that protects also isolates, because when you distrust everything all the time, it becomes increasingly difficult to let someone truly in. The person who sees others most clearly inside is, ironically, the one who has the most difficulty letting themselves be seen. It's like carrying a flashlight that's too powerful, illuminating everything around you, but leaving the person carrying it in darkness, invisible behind their own beam of light, seeing everything about others without ever being seen back with the same clarity. But there's a second, even deeper layer hidden behind this pattern of death and rebirth that Scorpio seems to repeat throughout its life. Because it's not just relationships that die, it's not just phases that end, it's identity itself that needs to periodically undergo a kind of controlled burning. The person you were 5 years ago simply no longer exists. And that's not a nice phrase, it's literal. Scorpio burns old versions of itself the way other signs change clothes. And each time this happens, there's a specific, almost physical pain of losing a piece of identity that was still comfortable, even though it was old, even though it no longer served its purpose. Some people call this instability, but it's the opposite. It's a different kind of stability, one that doesn't depend on keeping everything the same, but rather on accepting that keeping everything the same is, most of the time, the trap itself. While other signs seek security in repetition, Scorpio finds its security precisely in the ability to start over without completely falling apart in the process. It's a strange, almost paradoxical balance. The deepest certainty it carries is the certainty that nothing needs to last forever to have been worthwhile. The question that always lingers is, how long will this cycle repeat itself? How long will it be necessary to destroy in order to continue existing in a more genuine way? The answer, however uncomfortable it may be, is that perhaps this cycle will never truly stop. Perhaps it is, in fact, the very engine of everything, and that's exactly what no one stops to tell you when they call you the chosen one. If this cycle of burning old versions of yourself will never truly stop, the honest question isn't how to avoid the fire, but how to navigate it without getting lost along the way. That's exactly what the digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, helped me organize. It doesn't promise to extinguish Scorpio's inner fire, because that would be a lie. It shows how to use that intensity as direction, instead of letting it consume you aimlessly. For those born with this capacity to go too deep, having a map makes all the difference between getting lost again or understanding your own inner fire. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. There's something that confuses a lot of people when the subject is power and Scorpio. People associate the sign with control, manipulation, a kind of almost dark force. But nobody stops to ask where all this reputation comes from. Because most of the time, what exists underneath isn't a desire to dominate anyone. It's fear. An old, almost forgotten fear of being caught off guard again, of being deceived without realizing it, of trusting someone who then turns their back without any warning. This fear, when not acknowledged, disguises itself as strength. Scorpio learns early on that appearing unshakable is safer than actually being unshakable, because appearing strong wards off those who could hurt them, while being truly strong would still require opening some kind of breach, and no breach seems safe enough. And so this armor is born, which everyone sees from the outside, but which inside is made of a much more fragile material than it appears. It's the kind of strength that is built brick by brick, each time a pain needed to be hidden instead of shown, each time a tear was swallowed in front of others so as not to appear weak. And this is where the great paradox lies, the one that crosses the line from astrology and goes straight to the rawest psychology. The stronger Scorpio seems on the outside, the greater the vulnerability they usually carry hidden inside. There is no contradiction in this, only a logic that no one wanted to explain to you before. Visible strength is, more often than not, a direct response to the size of the invisible wound. The deeper the pain, the higher the wall built on top of it. Perhaps you've already felt this yourself, or in someone very close who shares this same sign. That person who seems to need no one, who solves everything alone, who never asks for help even when they're sinking inside, who smiles in the midst of a crisis just so no one notices the weight they're carrying alone, night after night, without any witnesses. It's not pure pride. It's the certainty planted long ago that asking for help is exposing yourself, and exposing yourself is giving ammunition for someone to use against you later. But there's a high price to pay for this protection. Because when no one knows how much you're carrying, no one can help you let go either. There is also a second layer within this same paradox, even more subtle. When Scorpio finally decides to trust someone, that trust usually comes with an intensity that frightens even those around them. There is no middle ground. Either the wall stands, whole, without any cracks, or it falls completely. And with it falls that vigilance that previously protected everything. This is why the bonds that Scorpio chooses to maintain tend to last so long, or hurt so much when they end, because they were never built on the surface. They were built precisely in the most fragile place that exists. And it is precisely this silent and uncomfortable recognition that separates those who remain trapped in this pattern forever from those who finally decide to do things differently. Recognizing that visible strength hides real vulnerability is the first step. But alone, without direction, this often leaves a person trapped between no longer wanting to pretend and not knowing where to let go of that armor. It was at this point that the divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose made sense to me, because it treats this Scorpio vulnerability not as a weakness to hide, but as the raw material of purpose, something that only gains value when faced head-on. Those who have already learned to endure so much alone deserve at least once a ready-made map instead of having to reinvent everything. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. There comes a point in almost every Scorpio's life when these pieces begin to fit together in a way that bothers more than it relieves. Because understanding the pattern itself isn't the same as getting rid of it instantly. Many people expect recognition to be accompanied by an immediate cure, as if simply naming the wound would make it stop hurting. That's not how it works. Recognition is just the first cut in light in a room that has been dark for years. There's still a lot to see after the eyes adjust, and a good part of that room holds old, dusty furniture that no one has dared to look at closely until now. And it is precisely at this point that psychology meets astrology in a way that no one can ignore anymore. Because the same mechanism that makes Scorpio distrust everything, that makes them destroy old versions of themselves, that makes them hide their own pain behind an armor of strength, is also the same mechanism that, when understood and directed, produces some of the most lucid, loyal, and crisis-ridden people in the entire zodiac. Intensity has never been the problem. The problem has always been not having anywhere to point that intensity. Perhaps this is, in the end, the true meaning behind the word chosen. Not chosen to suffer more, not chosen to carry a special burden that no one else could bear. Chosen, yes, but to develop something that most people will never need to develop, the ability to look directly into their own depths without looking away and still remain standing afterward, day after day, rebuilding without an audience or applause, a more complete version of themselves. This is neither good luck nor bad luck. It's a type of training that life imposes early on, without asking permission, and that only makes sense when observed from afar, after a good part of the journey has already been traveled. If you've made it this far, recognizing each of these patterns in yourself, you might now be feeling a strange mix of relief and discomfort. Relief at finally having words for something that was always just a feeling. Discomfort at realizing how much of this pattern is still active, still weighing you down, still demanding some direction you didn't have before. There is a difference between those who merely survive this pattern, repeating the same cycle of destruction without ever learning anything from it, and those who begin to use this same ability to delve deeper for their own benefit. The difference is not in the intensity, which remains the same for both. The difference lies in the direction. A person who learns to consciously direct this depth inward ceases to be a hostage of their own pattern and becomes, for the first time, its author. And that's precisely where the unsettling beauty of being a Scorpio lies. Because this sign was never made for an easy life, for a tranquil surface, for glossing over its own wounds. It was made to descend, to burn, to traverse, and one day to emerge on the other side, carrying a clarity that most people will never have the courage to seek. Discovering that intensity was never the problem, but rather the lack of direction for it, changes everything, but still leaves a practical question in the air. Where to begin directing something so old? It was precisely this gap that the divine path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose came to fill for me, transforming that hard training that life imposed without asking permission into a path with a recognizable purpose, tailor-made for someone who carries the Scorpio depth as a trademark. It's not about softening who you are, it's about stopping wasting all that energy without direction. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. In the end, perhaps the greatest truth about Scorpio isn't in any of the layers we've traversed so far, but in the silent sum of them all. It's the sign that learns, through sheer force of will, not to fear its own darkness. It's the sign that allows itself to die several times within the same life, only to be reborn a little more whole each time. There's no easy lightness on this path, and perhaps there never will be. But there is something rarer than lightness. There is depth. There is the capacity to feel everything to the end and still remain standing, looking at one's own reflection without averting one's face, without needing to pretend that it all costs nothing. If you carry this sign, or love someone who does, perhaps now you understand a little better why certain people, when they finally cross their own fire, emerge on the other side, seeming touched by something that others still can't name. Perhaps that is all, in the end, the true meaning of being chosen.